Hi, Shira just sent me a message that she is going to be in a few minutes because she's just feeding her baby, but you could start without her.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Hi. It's really my honor to be learning with you tonight. I have watched your community grow with such amazement, and I look forward to a time in the not too distant future when we can sit together and learn together face to face and not on Zoom. But until then, kol hakavod to all of you and the incredible dedication you have to your community and what you've been building. So I'm Sharon Grossman. I am a radiation oncologist who specializes in breast cancer and also have a master's in public health. And I am a graduate of the Matan Marot LaHalacha program, which is an advanced halacha learning program, where we were trained to where we studied life cycle events and learned Hilchot Nida, the laws of Nida, intensively with exams, written exams and oral exams, tested by the leading rabbis in the Dati Leumi world, and also certified to answer questions in Hilchot Nida. Also done training in Marot over a year's time, working with Rav Rimon and Rav Kanal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, as well as Rav Bigman and Rabbanit Shani Taragim. So let me just say a few words about Eden. Naomi had asked me to just tell you guys a little bit about Eden. The Eden Center works to improve the experience of mikvah and promote the spiritual, emotional, intimate, and physical health of Jewish women and families. We do professional training of mikvah attendants, kala and chatan teachers, community programs like the one you guys are attending tonight, and create resources like Birkat Emunah for mikvah and infertility, and hope and healing. That's really, hope and healing is something I've worked on quite a great deal. It's a guidebook for women who are BRCA carriers or have a diagnosis of breast cancer to help them through the mikvah experience, also for balaniot. And we have a weekly podcast, lots of online courses, an active blog, and much, much more. And so we encourage you to add your own voice to the Eden Center. I actually spoke with Shira, who I think also spoke with Atara, to try to get a sense of what things might interest the community. And we thought to structure the two evenings as follows. Tonight, talk about some of the pitfalls we get into in terms of becoming NIDA and some of the challenges we face exiting NIDA. To do that through cases, to really tell you about some of the women who I've counseled in my experience, and tips that I've had for them, and how they weathered these challenges. And next time we meet to discuss different kinds of birth control and how they might impact upon NIDA and some of the issues they might raise. And so what we're going to do in the next 2 weeks, the next 2 Tuesday nights, is really have conversations that you can only have once you're in the club. An insider's refreshers course, because when you learn as a kala, the focus is very different. It's a lot of information at once, hard to process all of it. And many of the issues that you're thinking about as a kala, you aren't really thinking about, you weren't anticipating what it might be like later on in life. And so the circumstances change. The demands on your time change. Having kids changes things. Maybe you're using a different form of birth control. Also, if there's been a gap in Hilchot Nida with pregnancy and nursing, it's easy to get out of practice. So I really hope that the next 2 weeks, the next 2 visits that we have together, help give you perspective and guidance as you navigate this new stage. There'll be lots of opportunities for questions. Tonight, there should be at least 20 minutes for questions. And if people have questions they want to ask me privately, I'm happy to speak with people one-on-one. or to stay on the Zoom, as long as people need tonight to answer their questions. And if there are things that I don't know the answer to, then we have next week for me to update you with the answers. So let's start with the story of Rachel. Rachel is married with 3 children, and the oldest is 5 years old, and she has not been away from her daughter, the oldest, since she was born. And finally, her parents, I forgot to say, I'm also the mother of Nama and mother-in-law of Shlomo, and the Savta of Aviad and Raphael Rand. So Rachel's mother had been begging her to give her the joy to watch the 3 children, and she should go away.
Could I add also that you were my college teacher?
Yes, that was my biggest zchut. Thank you. So her parents have been pressuring her, asking her to go away so that she and her husband could have some alone time together. And they finally agree to go. They finally decide to go away. They're going to go to Greece for the week. And they plan the trip around her not being a nida. And they get to a beautiful hotel, and she walks into the bathroom, and there's a beautiful bathtub, and she says, I have to take a bath. And she gets undressed, she looks down at her underwear, and there is a huge stain on her underwear. And she calls me from Greece in a panic. What am I going to do? How could this happen? We timed it perfectly, and now we can't be together. We can't even touch each other. What are we going to do? And so I'd like to share with you what I told her. Some of you may have heard of Rabbanit Shani Tarragon's 7 myths of Nida. So myth number 2 and myth number 3 are as follows. Myth number 2 is that it's a mitzvah to become a Nida, and that is in fact a myth. If we look at the Psukim, which we will in just a few moments, the Psukim say when a woman has a sensation and she becomes a Nida, she must count 7 days. And there's no indication from the Psukim. The way it's worded is when she has a flow, she becomes a Nida. There is no notion of that there's a special mitzvah to become Nida. Once she becomes a Nida, it is a mitzvah to take all of the steps to exit Nida, and the consequences of not separating from her husband are quite severe, but there is no mitzvah to become a Nida in the first place. And that is why halacha permits women to take a birth control like seasonal, which goes for 3 months without getting a period. That's why halacha permits women to take a packet of birth control and go into the next packet without taking any of the placebo and bleeding in between. That's why a woman who is going through menopause or perimenopause and has very minimal staining is not required to become a Nida. There's no mitzvah to do that unless halacha would dictate that, unless she does not meet certain halachic requirements. And that's why a woman who has the Mirena, an IUD, and we can talk about that the next time that we meet together, if she has spotting and it's very minimal, again, there's no reason she needs to become a Nida. Myth number 3 is that Taharat HaMishpacha is essential to keep a marriage fresh. This is the reason for it. It's to liven the marriage up, to keep it new and exciting. And this myth comes from a statement of Rabbi Meir in the Gemara that she should be as dear to him as on her wedding night. But many women don't feel that it works for them that way, and that it's quite challenging, and that maybe it puts some stress on their marriage. So, for example, when you're a kala and you have to deal with dam betulin and separating, that can be very frustrating. Or when you have little children and it's time to do bdikot and it's shkia time, it's also very challenging. Or when they're older and you need to go to the mikveh and you need to slip out of the house without anyone knowing, how do you do that as well? And so maybe the ultimate proof that Rabbi Meir's statement, well, there are a couple of reasons that Rabbi Meir's statement may not hold, or that isn't necessarily the ultimate reason for Hilchot Nida, is that you look at breastfeeding. Halacha really encourages women to breastfeed. A woman who is breastfeeding has special halachic status. And if Nida was so important to keep the marriage fresh, then perhaps it would not, breastfeeding shouldn't play such a central role. And so the answer to why we have Hilchot Nida is a topic for a very lengthy discussion. But the reason we do this is because this is what the Torah told us to do. And sometimes it's more meaningful to us, and sometimes it's less meaningful. 1 month it may be more meaningful, another month it may be less meaningful, it may be more challenging. And at different stages in life, it can take on different meaning. And that's okay. Because in the end of the day, we're doing this because this is what the Torah told us and has told us to do. And where we go with it, it's enough to just show up sometimes. So just to lay that as the groundwork, because there are women who struggle with these issues. And so that's the background. Any posek or halakhic authority who answers questions related to Nida has to balance between two very complicated, competing halachic issues. On the one hand, there's the laws of Nida, and on the other hand, we have mitzvat onah and mitzvat puravu, which are two biblical obligations. And so anytime that a woman's in Nida, she cannot perform mitzvat puravu at that specific moment, and mitzvat onah also becomes more complicated, although we will talk a little bit later that mitzvat onah is a very broad issue that doesn't necessarily even have to involve intimacy. But be that as it may, halacha really places a strong emphasis on maximizing the amount of time that a woman is permitted to her husband. And we see this from various different sources. And so I'd like to share my source sheet with you. But before I do that, I should have asked you to introduce yourselves. So is that okay? Is that not cool? Okay. So can we I think I know Naama. And where you are in life in terms of children and anyone? No?
I'm happy to start.
Go on.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Tara Bienenfeld. And we have 4 children. Baruch Hashem. Guess that's where I am in life.
Very nice. Anyone else want to introduce or no?
I can go. I'm Shira.
Hello.
Hi. I just had my third 6 months ago. So I have 3 kids. We live in Carnegie.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Olivia. I also live in Carmagat, and I also have 3 kids. Where I am.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can introduce myself. Hi, I'm Melanie. I also live in Carmegat, and I also have 3 kids.
Anyone else?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Aliza Waxstock. I live in Evan Shmuel. I have 4 kids, ages 4 to 11.
Very nice. So everyone's
Hi. I'm sorry, I can't put my video on at the moment. My name's Sarah. I also live in Evan Shmuel. I have 4 children, Baruch Hashem, and they range from 15 down to 8. And I'm like in my like nearly mid 40s. So like I'm already like at the next stage. Yeah, that's me.
Have I met everyone?
Hi, sorry, my camera's off as well. I'm Naomi from Karmagat, and I have one daughter who is 1.5.
Very nice. So we really have a range here. People from, you know, one child to 4 children, spread over wide ranges. So we have a broad range of mikvah experiences and nida experiences, which is great. It'll give us a lot to talk about. So and everyone introduce themselves? Yes? Okay, so here's my source sheet. And as I was saying, the sources suggest that we must do that really everything must be done to maximize the amount of time that a woman is permitted to her husband. And so we see this from the Yerushalmi, which says, Asur li'isha lishhot b'tumata, that it's prohibited for a woman to remain in a state of tuma any longer than halacha would allow. But we don't paskin like the Yerushalmi. And so we turn to the Bavli. And from the Bavli, we see the Gemara asks, why was Yehoshua punished that he was not allowed to have any children? Because because he prevented Am Yisrael from mitzvah of Pruah for one night. How? Because he left the Aron in the Machaneh for one night. And when the Aron was in the Machaneh, couples could not have relations. And as a punishment, he could not have any children. And so we see how much emphasis is placed on making sure that the couple maximizes the time that they're permitted to each other. And so it's a balancing act between nida and mitzvah puravu and mitzvat ona. And so how does a woman become a nida on a biblical level? So through childbirth is the first way. And then the second way is if she has a hargasha. And so the Vayikra tells us, Isha kitia zavad dam yeh zova bivsara, shivat yamim tiheya benidota, v'kol nogea ba yitameh ata arav. That when a woman has a discharge in her flesh, she is a nida for 7 days. And so Shmuel asks, why does the text say bivsara? It's superfluous. Why do we need to know that she has a discharge bivsara from bivsara? It's extra. It doesn't add anything. What's it there for? So the answer is ad shetargish bivsara. That bivsara is there to teach us that she does not become a nida. When she sees blood, she does not become a nida on a biblical level until she has some sort of feeling, until she has hargasha. And so, what exactly is that hargasha? And there are various different definitions of hargasha. The first definition is the Rambam's definition. He says, Zeya haguf, that her body is shaking. She has some shaking sensation that is immediately followed by the appearance of blood. The prevailing definition is that of, which is that of most Rishonim, which is ptichat hamakor, the sensation that her uterus is opening up, followed by the appearance of blood. And then there's a third opinion, which is a minority opinion, that zivat davar lach, that hargasha is defined as a feeling of something dripping out of the uterus. And even those who, there's a disagreement over where that dripping sensation should be. In this minority opinion, is it higher up, closer to the cervix? Is it vaginal wetness? But the prevailing definition is, the most commonly accepted definition is a sensation of the uterus opening. Has anyone had that sensation? So I don't know anyone who's had that sensation, but I saw a recent study that about 30% of women will have reported that kind of sensation. And if they have that kind of sensation followed by the appearance of blood, then they are considered a nida on a biblical level. So how can a woman be considered a nida on a biblical level in the absence of that sensation? How does that work today? Well, if she has a flow, we believe that there must have been a hargasha and she just didn't notice it. So a woman who has a flow would be considered a nida on a biblical level. Also, if she sees blood immediately after intense genital stimulation, we need to worry that perhaps there was a hargasha, a sensation that was masked by that stimulation. So for example, if a woman sees blood after having relations, or she sees blood after urination, or she sees blood on a badika cloth when she after she inserts anything into the vagina, a tampon, diaphragm, or an edge, we have to be concerned that that blood was accompanied by a hargasha that she didn't notice because of the stimulation in the area. And that's why the recommendation is to wait after having relations to separate. In case if there is blood, if you do see blood, we won't be worried that that blood was accompanied by a hargasha that was masked by the intercourse. That's why we recommend that women wait to wipe after they urinate. Why? Not because we don't want you to know what's happening with your body, not because we want you to avoid looking at blood, but because if you do see blood when you wipe, we don't need to worry that that blood was accompanied by a hargasha that you didn't notice because of urination. And so the recommendation is to wait 15 seconds. Now, Sephardi women, if they see blood after urination, we don't worry about this, but for Ashkenazi women, it is an issue. And so that's where the recommendation comes from, to wait after urinating. It's very hard to wait 15 seconds. And I get a lot of questions about, well, I didn't count to 15. Is it long enough? And basically, when you get into trouble when you're in the situation of there's a pot on the stove and it's boiling, or the kids are screaming and you're just rushing to go to the bathroom, wiping before you're even done, that's a problem. But if you can say that, yes, I finished urinating and I was totally done, and maybe it was 10 seconds, maybe it was 15, then you're probably okay. It's worth asking the halachic question, but in all likelihood, you're okay. And so that's where the recommendation comes from. That's also why any amounts of blood seen on a badika cloth would render a woman a nida, because we're worried that she may have had hargasha when she was doing the badika, and that blood was accompanied by a hargasha that she didn't notice, and any amounts of blood under those circumstances would make her a nida. So in the absence of hargasha, yes, very good point. Thank you, Olivia. It is, if you are in the situation, I meant to say that, so thank you for reminding me, if you're in the situation where the kids are crying and you're rushing to the bathroom and you don't have time to count, then just wipe and flush and don't look. But again, I don't want to encourage people to not know what's happening with their bodies. It's very important to be in touch with your body and to know what's going on and to know when you're bleeding. And so when you can, and you can count and you can wait, it's best to do that. But if you can't, then just wipe and flush and don't look. So in the absence of, when you see blood, in the absence of a hargasha, and it's not a flow, and you're not seeing it immediately after intercourse or immediately after urinating, or on a badika cloth, or after something was inserted into the vagina, how does a woman become a nida? Well, on a biblical level, she would not be a nida. However, so as not to be lenient on something as severe as nida, Chachamim determined that under very, very specific circumstances, a woman would become a nida. And so the Gemara tells us, Lo lahakel al divrei Torah, el lahachmir al divrei Torah, uktamim atzman d'Rabbanan. That so as not to be lax on something as important and as ominous as the laws of nida, Chachamim decided to make a gzera, to make a rabbinic decree that under very specific circumstances, a woman would be a nida when she sees blood in the absence of hargasha, in the absence of a flow, in the absence of when it's not related to any intense genital stimulation. And what are those circumstances? So we're going to go through each one of these in detail right now. And as we're going through it, and this is something that I impressed upon Rachel and that I think all of us need to be aware of, the criteria by which a woman becomes a nida when she sees a stain are based on really rooted in halacha. They're rooted in the Mishnah. They're not modern inventions, because so often we feel, I felt, and women I've met with and counseled have expressed to me that they felt that they're cheating the system, that they're playing games, that they're manipulating, that they see blood, they're definitely a nida, or they really are a nida, but they're doing all these manipulations to avoid becoming nida. And what I'd like to impart to everyone tonight is that all of these recommendations of how to conduct oneself are not a new modern invention to cheat the system, but they're part of the system. They're built into halacha, they're rooted in halacha, and they're rooted in how the evolution of halacha. This is where it comes from. So the first criteria that we look at when it comes to a stain and whether or not it renders a woman a nida. Again, this is someone who sees blood in the absence of her gasha. It's not a flow, and it's not after urination or intercourse or after radika, is size. How big is the stain? And so the Gemara teaches us, actually, the Mishnah teaches us that there were lice in people's beds, and the women would wake up in the morning and the sheets would be covered with blood. And so from the lice biting in the middle of the night, which is really hard to imagine today. But had there not been any limit on the size of a stain that would make a woman nida, there would be no home where the woman was ever out of nida, because there was always blood in the bed. And so based on the lice example, Chachamim established that if a stain is less than a gris, which was a bean, 19 millimeters, a woman is not a nida. And so what is that today? What is that? What size is a gris? So a gris is roughly the size of a penny or a shekel. And how do we measure it? So I had the zchut to learn with Rav Knoll before, when he was quite ill. And how does he measure it? He pulled a shekel out of his pocket, put it on top of the stain on the woman's underwear, traced the penny around the stain with a pencil, lifted the penny up, and saw whether the stain was confined to the circle or extended beyond the circle. And if it was within the circle, then she was not nida. And if it was outside the stain, then that criteria was a problem for her. And unless she had another criteria, she would be considered a nida. But not all stains are round. In fact, usually they're long and thin, as you can see in Rav Knoll's book. And so in that situation, we take the shekel, superimpose it on the biggest part of the stain, and try to and trace it, and then remove the shekel and try to estimate if the part that's outside will fit into the rest of the circle. And if yes, she's not a nida. If no, then perhaps she might not be a nida based on one of the other criteria. But we're not just looking at the whole stain. We're actually looking at the part of the stain that has suspicious colors. So for example, so what colors are problematic? Well, red or black are problematic, and anything that tends to red or black, so pink. But if there's a part of the stain that is light brown, then that wouldn't be measured in the 19 millimeters. And so when you measure only the part that is red or black, or a tendency to red or black. Now, browns are very complicated. And if you see brown needs to be shown to someone, because it's very subtle. And I spent over a year looking at marot, surprised by what some post-game would consider okay. So if you see brown, it's generally accepted brown color of coffee with milk is acceptable. Although there are different criteria for hefsek Tara than for Shiva Nikiyim. But brown that's darker requires taking to someone to look at, even after you've looked at it many times. I sat with Rav Ramon in his dining room where he poured coffee grounds on top of a Bedika cloth and compared the color of the stain on the Bedika cloth to the coffee. If it was lighter than the coffee, it was permitted. If it was darker, it was asur. It was a true zchut to do that with him, but it just shows the subtlety of brown and why it's so important to come with marot. As unpleasant as it can be, as it might seem, it can really make all the difference in a marriage, because we tend to overcall things when we just don't know, and it really might be okay. So the color is very important. The material that the stain appears on is also important. And there are certain materials that do not receive ritual impurity. They're not makabel tuma, and those are things that the ground doesn't receive ritual impurity, something connected to the ground. So a toilet bowl would not receive ritual impurity. A bathtub doesn't receive ritual impurity. Plastic, nylon, synthetic materials, cotton does. What about toilet paper? So toilet paper is a very popular question. I saw blood after I wiped on toilet paper. So the first question is, how long did you wait? And if you waited enough time, you waited 15 seconds, then we can treat the toilet paper, the blood on the toilet paper, as a ketem, as a stain. We don't need to worry that there was hargasha accompanied by the blood, and which would automatically make the woman nida, no matter what size the blood stain was on the toilet paper. And so if you've waited long enough and you have blood on toilet paper, does toilet paper receive ritual impurity? Is it makabel tuma? So the Rav Moshe Feinstein would say no. Anything which is disposable, like a panty liner, a pad, like toilet paper, does not receive ritual impurity. There are others, though, who would argue that toilet paper does, and that's why some people use colored panty liners, because anything that has color also does not receive ritual impurity, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But why is it that something that is not makabel tuma, that does not receive ritual impurity, that has a stain, does not make a woman nida? Because it would be very confusing if the object on which the stain appears doesn't become can't become impure, yet the woman who's one step removed from the stain would become impure. So what about colored material? We've all been told to wear colored underwear. Where does that come from? That is not a modern invention. The recommendation to wear colors to save one from becoming a nida actually comes from the Mishnah. Tana Rabbanan, beged tzavua matameh mishum ketem. Rabbi Natan Bar Yosef Omer eno matameh mishum ketem. There's a disagreement in the Mishnah whether a stain on a colored object can become impure. And the first opinion in the Mishnah says it can make a woman nida, and the second opinion is that it can't make a woman nida. And the proof, the second statement, which says a colored material is a stain or colored material cannot make a woman a nida, goes on to say, "Shelo tiknu bigdei sivonin leisha elul hakel al kitmehen." So, because we did not establish that women wear colored clothing, we only established it to save them from their stains. And the Gemara says, "Tiknu, what? You established there's a gezerah, there's a decree to wear colored clothing? My tiknu ninhu. Who established what is this? What decree is there to wear colored clothing? No, we permitted women to wear colored clothing to save them from their stains. Who true that we permitted them? What? That sounds like it was prohibited. Was it ever prohibited? Yes, it was prohibited. Ditnan b'polimus shel aspesinus gazru al atarot chatanim va'al ha'irus. Bikshu ligzor al bigdei sivornim. Amrei ha'adifa kadei lahakel al kitmehem. No, there was actually going to be a decree to ban women from wearing colored clothing, to ban a chatan from wearing a special vest, because a special atara, because as a sign of sadness, because the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And they decided in the end to not make this decree against colored clothing, to save women, to help women not become nida from ktamim. And the Rambam actually uses the language of tiknu, that there was a rabbinic decree to wear colored clothing to save women from becoming nida. The Shulchan Aruch writes that if there's a stain on a colored garment, the woman is tahora. And then the Rama adds, therefore, a woman should wear colored clothing to save her from ktamim. So there isn't a decree, but it's a strong, good recommendation that women should wear colored clothing. And so if you're wearing colored underwear, whether it is light colored or dark colored, and there is a stain on it, in the absence of a flow, in the absence of hargasha, that stain would not render you a nida, based on what was established in the time of the Mishnah. Now, based on that, we recommend that women wear colored underwear at all times except Shiva Naki'im. And also that they wear panty liners when necessary. Again, because if blood appears on a panty liner, which does not receive ritual impurity, woman would not become a nida. Now, the location of the stain is also important. If the blood is on your hand or the inner thigh, then that is highly suspicious. If it's on your shoulder, though, unless you did a handstand, it can be discounted. It is unlikely to be nida blood. We talked about the color of the stain, and then the final criteria is attributing the stain to other causes. Can we attribute the stain to other causes? And so this dates all the way back to the time of the Mishnah. I don't know if you've had any phone calls with halachic advisors who've asked you, if you say you've had a stain, if they ask you, are there any other possible circumstances? Do you have a cut? Well, this is where it's based on, those questions. So the Mishnah tells us, she attributes the blood to anything that she can possibly attribute it to. If she shechted an animal, or she worked along people who were dealing with dyes, she can attribute the stain to these other causes. She can attribute the blood to her husband, if possible, she can, or to her child. Then she would not be considered a nida. And so how does that work today? So if I work in the emergency room and my scrubs get full of blood from the patients that I see, I can attribute the blood to that and not worry that I'm a nida. If my son has a bloody nose and I pick him up from the ground and I have blood all over me, I can attribute it to that. My husband has hemorrhoids and I see blood all over the bed, and we know that he's active, that he has this active problem. We can attribute the blood to that as well. And then we have this issue of makkah. If she has a makkah, she has a wound, and she can make it release blood, then she can attribute the blood to the makkah. And the Mishnah goes on and tells us the story of Rabbi Akiva. Isha achat shaba'at lifnei Rabbi Akiva. Amra lo ra'iti ketem. Amar la shema makkah hayta bich. So a woman comes to Rabbi Akiva and she says, I have a ketem, I have this stain. What's its status? He says, well, maybe you have a makkah, maybe you have a wound. And she says, yes, I did, but it healed. And then he says, well, maybe you can make it release blood. She says, yes, I can. Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that she's tahora. his Talmidim see him doing this, and they said, "What? How could you do this?" They're in dismay. Here's a woman, she came with a ketem, and he's telling her she's Torah, and he says, "Ma davar kasha beinechem? What's your problem? Shelo amru chachamim hadavar lahachmir elo lakel. Shemar v'isha k'tiyah zavad dam yeh zova b'vsarad dam v'lo ketem." She says that the psukim talk about blood and not ktamim, and so he's able to attribute the blood from her stain to a makkah and says she's tahora. So today, how does the whole makkah story work? So if you have only uterine blood renders a woman nida. She has blood from her cervix or blood from her coming from her vagina, and we know that that's where the stain is coming from, then the stain would not make her a nida. And sometimes we know. So for example, if you hold up a hand mirror and you see that there's a cut and it's bleeding, and you see a stain on your underwear, then you can attribute it to that cut. Sometimes every time you do a bedika in one spot, it might hurt in that spot or it might bleed in that spot. And so these are important things to tell someone if you have a ketem and you're asking the halachic question whether that ketem might make you a nida. Also, though, it's important to know that a makkah, a wound in the uterus, doesn't necessarily render you a nida if you know that you have an active wound in the uterus that is bleeding. So for example, a woman who has fibroids might be bleeding, and so you can ask a halachic question. Well, if I know that I have fibroids in my uterus and I'm bleeding from them, does that render me a nida? Now, most poskim would say yes, but someone who's had an endometrial biopsy, who's bleeding because she has a wound in her uterus from the biopsy, can also ask a question. The doctor says you might expect to see blood for the first couple days after you've had the endometrial biopsy, then any bleeding that she sees after that can be attributed to the procedure and would not necessarily make her a nida. So it's very important when you have any medical procedure done to ask what is being done, to ask about the width of the instruments that are being used, because if they're beyond a certain width, then there's a concern about dilation of the cervix, which could make a woman nida. However, most instruments that are used today are not wide enough to cause ptichat hamakor, or a large enough opening of the uterus to make someone a nida. And to ask, should you expect to bleed? And if so, for how long? Because if you do bleed, then you can attribute any of that bleeding over the next couple of days to the procedure that was done, and it wouldn't necessarily make you a nida. So in the absence of hargasha, a woman who sees blood in the absence of hargasha, and it's not a flow, and it's not related to urination or intercourse or after an internal examination, or something's inserted internally, can only become a nida if she sees a stain that is larger than 19 millimeters in a color that is worrisome, red or black, that has on a material that receives ritual impurity, that is white, that is not colored, okay, in a location that is suspicious if she sees it on her body, in a situation where she cannot attribute it to any other cause. So Rachel's situation, it was the following. She saw blood on her underwear. There was no hargasha. It was not a flow. It was not after urinating or after intercourse. It was really large, but it was on colored underwear. So she was okay. She did not become a nida. And literally, she is the example of the Ramah, to the colored underwear, to save her from becoming a nida. And so I then gave her instructions of what to do to get through the next week with her husband. really to be able to enjoy the time together. And so I instructed her not to insert a tampon unless she was certain she was a nida, not to perform any unnecessary bdikot, because any amount of blood on the tampon, any amount of blood on the bdika would make her a nida. I told her to continue wearing colored underwear. She could put on a panty liner because panty liner does not receive ritual impurity. It's not makabel tuma. And I told her to wait after wiping, after urination. She asked if she could have relations. And so I explained to her that technically she was not a nida, but that the recommendation is to wait 24 hours before having relations. So to avoid a situation of bra machmat tashmish, where the blood was seen immediately after intercourse, which requires a halachic question. And also to see where the bleeding was going. Was it petering out or was it going to turn into a flow? And also when they did have relations, to not have it on white sheets or to use white towels. They did not have, the sheets in the hotel were white, so they went out and bought a colored towel. And luckily they were able to really enjoy the rest of their time together. So that is Rachel's story. Now I'd like to share with you a story of Leah. So Leah is actually, I'm trying to stop the screen share just for a moment. Okay, so Leah is in her late 30s and can't get a hefsek Tara until day 9. She just keeps seeing blood. And she's does the hefsek on day 9, goes to the mikvah on day 16, and then sees more blood on day 20. And this has been on for about a year. And the number of days that she and her husband have been together are few and far between, and it's causing a lot of stress in their marriage. And so I explained to her that hefsek Tara does not need to be completely clean. It just has to be free of red and black and anything that has an etiyah that is suggestive of those colors. And that, of course, brown requires really intensive evaluation. Don't try to decide on your own the status of a brown, because it's very complicated and must be brought to someone with expertise. And I also tell her that to do a hefsek Tara, she may wash herself out. And she can do more than one hefsek Tara. She could do 10 hefsek Taras, but the last one is what is koveya. The last one sets the tone. And so she does 10, and luckily the 10th one was okay. And then she changes to white underwear, and she does bdikat yom rishon, and it comes out fine. But she calls me in a panic because there's a huge stain on her underwear. She says, should I just go do another hefsek? Should I start counting all over again? So I tell her to come to me with the underwear. And there is a very large stain, but most of it is light brown, and only a small piece is red or black or suspicious. And so she can continue counting. But I give her specific instructions now what to do. I tell her to put on a panty liner, because the bleeding on a panty liner would not render her a nida, because it does not receive ritual impurity. It's not makabel tuma. And then we talk about bdikot. So ideally, lechatchila, a woman should do, according to the Shulchan Aruch, a woman should do 2 bdikot a day, in the morning and then in the evening before mincha. And this is ideally. If she can't do that, and that's for all 7 days, if she can't do that, then 1 a day. And if she really can't do that because she's having trouble with the bdikot, that she can do day 1, she must do day 1 and day 7, and try to do a middle day. Why? Because if she forgets to do on day 8 and she's only done on day 1, she has to start counting all over again. But if she's done day 1, 3, and forgets to do day 7 and suddenly remembers on day 8, then she can go to the mikveh the next day and that middle Bdika will have saved her count. So she doesn't have to start counting all over again. So she is able to do a Bdika on day 1, a middle day, day 7. She gets to the mikveh. Instead of getting to the mikveh on day 16, she's now getting to the mikveh on day 12, but suddenly she starts bleeding again on day 20. And again, it's staining. And give her some of the instructions that I've given to Rachel about, again, the panty liner. She's switched to colored underwear after she went to the mikveh, waiting to wipe, colored towels, colored sheets. But she's still, this is still a problem for her. And so she actually goes to the gynecologist, who identifies a hormonal imbalance and prescribes some progesterone for the end of the cycle to help with the staining. And I'd like to tell you about another woman named Sarah, whose husband is coming home from Miluim next week. And she just went to the doctor. He told her that she has a urinary tract infection and a yeast infection, and that she should expect to see some bleeding in over the next few days. She happens to have been in Nida. She somehow managed to get a good hefsek tara in spite of all of this that was going on with her. And she did a bdikat yom rishon, and there is blood, a lot of blood on the bdika cloth, and it looks very different than what she had seen previously in previous months. So she calls me up and she says, should she just, should she wait till she stops bleeding and do another hefsek tara? What should she do? And so the answer, I consulted with various poskim. I try to consult with poskim on any question that I get. And even the simple ones that I've asked 1,000 times just to make sure. And he tells me that no, she can keep counting, because we know the doctor has told her that she has a makkah, she has a urinary tract infection, and she has a yeast infection. And we can attribute any of the bleeding that she's seeing on the bdika cloth to those sources. We know she's actively bleeding. And even more importantly, she told us that the blood looks different than what she typically sees on her bdika. And so had she not come to me, she would have waited until she stopped bleeding to try to do another hefsek. Probably would have taken a good week until the infections cleared, and then started the process of hefsek tara and counting shivanakim, and really missed out on all of that time she could have been with her husband. And this story illustrates the importance of asking halachic questions, asking your doctor questions, asking how long she can expect to bleed from the urinary tract infection and the yeast infection, and the importance of her perspective, her piece in the story saying that the blood looked different was very important, because it's indicated that something was different, and it also shows the importance halacha places on the woman's voice and her role in this whole process. So I'd like to leave time for questions, but I would be remiss if I didn't spend a few moments talking about Nida in the postpartum period, in the year after giving birth, or the first 2 years after giving birth. So I'd like to share a couple very brief stories with you. So is 9 weeks postpartum, and she has gone through multiple cycles of hefsek tara, a couple of days of decode, and she suddenly just starts bleeding again. And she's done about 5 cycles of this, and she just can't get to the mikveh. She's watched her friends go after 3 or 4 weeks, and this prolonged separation from her husband is causing a lot of stress. It's very hard, and she's beside herself. She actually thinks she's never going to make it to the mikveh. And so I tell her mazel tov, and I explain to her that that this can be a really challenging time. It's a time full of all kinds of different emotions. She's exhausted. She needs help. She needs her husband to be able to touch her. She needs his physical support, and and that it's very important during this time to keep communication open and to try to show each other that they appreciate each other with small gestures, that sometimes this time can be very overwhelming, and women can have can sometimes feel sad, have the baby blues, which can even be postpartum depression. Not that I was suggesting that she had it, but that it's a very challenging time, and that every woman's body is different. Every woman's pregnancy is different. One pregnancy can be very different from another, and that just everyone follows their own course, and that she will get to the mikveh. The average time that women bleed after giving birth is 4 to 6 weeks, but some women can go 8 to 10 weeks or even longer. And so I instruct her to try to do a hefsek Tara and to bring it to me. And so she comes to me on a Tuesday night at about 7:30 with her hefsek Tara, and she says, I don't think it's any good, but please just take a look. And it is not clean, but it's brown, and it's light brown. And I said, no, it's fine. You can keep going. Tomorrow can be the first of Shiva Nakim. But there's one problem. I didn't do the hefsek until 20 minutes after Shkia. Does it count? Can I go to the mikveh next Tuesday night, or do I have to wait till Wednesday? So I said, so we sit down together and we look up on my Zmanim what time Shkia actually was, because the problem is if you look on your phone and you see when sunrise and sunset is based on the weather, that's not necessarily accurate in terms of halachic Zmanim. And in fact, it was 20 minutes too late, and I explained that she'd have to go the next night. That this could count as a hefsek. She could do another one during the day tomorrow if she wanted, but that moving forward, it was very important to try to do her b'dikot earlier in the day, to have a timer on her phone. It is very, very hectic. Shkia is impossible at every stage of life. But when you're working or you have little children at home and it's the witching hour and they want to eat and they need to go to bed, just keeping it all together can be very difficult. So if possible, to try to do it earlier in the day, have an alarm to remember. And especially if there's a possibility that you might need to do multiple b'dikot. Again, when we do multiple b'dikot, to try to wait in between each b'dika that you're doing. If you're going to do 10 in a row, then please wait, because otherwise you might cause a wound, cause yourself to bleed, and then you're going to see blood, but not because there's really blood there, but because you've injured yourself. So she does her b'dikot. And she's ready to she's going to make it to the mikveh on day 7, but she calls me up. I can't prepare. How am I going to prepare? I don't have time. How is it going to work? I don't have the energy either. So we come up with a plan together that she and her husband will decide how it will work, how he can help, when he is most available. If he's available, a little before, right immediately before Shkia, that she can prepare then. She could do a little bit during the day also, cut her nails. And that way it won't be rushed. That way he'll be a part of it. That way she won't in any way be resentful. But then she turns to me and says, but I have no koach. I can't, I have no energy. I have no desire to be intimate. What should I do? And I explained to her that it's very important to talk to her husband, explain to him what she's feeling, communicate, and they may decide not to be intimate. And if they agree together, that's okay. I also explained to her that mitzvat onah is not just having relations. The last source on the sheet that I shared with you is from Rav Moshe Feinstein, where he tells his grandchildren that chibuk v'nishuk, hug kissing, is also mitzvat onah. And that's actually based on the Shach, who rules that way in the context of a bride who has not had relations for the first time, and it's Friday night, and there was this notion that you couldn't have relations for the first time on Friday night. It was a minhag that we don't follow because it might cause a wound. He said it was fine for her to have chibuk v'nishuk because that is an important that's a form of intimacy and mitzvah onah that is recognized by halacha. So armed with all that, she goes to the mikvah. Oh, and I also tell her that she may change her mind after she has had some physical touch. She may want to be more intimate with her husband. And somehow she gets to the mikvah and all works out well. Now, her friend calls me up, who's 3 weeks postpartum. She's had a traumatic delivery with stitches and hemorrhoids that are bleeding. But she says, I think I could probably do b'dikot. I just don't know what to do about the stitches and the hemorrhoids. And so I explained to her that if the b'dika comes out fine, then she can keep counting. But if the b'dika comes out okay, and there's one little patch of blood, and it's from the stitches, it's in the area of the stitches, and that area is sore, she can attribute the blood that she's seeing in that area to the stitches, and her b'dikot are okay. She gets through the b'dikot. She goes to the doctor though for her checkup, and the doctor says that that he sees blood, and so she asks what should she do, and I ask her to confirm with the doctor where the blood's coming from. The doctor says no, it's from the stitches. She can keep counting. And then she tells me that the doctor told her that she has to wait to have relations until 6 weeks, which is a common recommendation, but she's way ahead of the game at 4 weeks. And so she asked, should she not go? And I said, no, it's important to go so that you don't have to deal with the harchas, and you can touch, and you can have physical contact, which will be a tremendous relief to your relationship. And so that's what she does. 2 more quick stories, if with your permission, about women in the first year after giving birth. So Honey is a year after having a C-section. She has a very weird story. Every month she does her b'dika, she does her hefsek on day 5, and on day 1 she does her b'dikat yom rishon, and then suddenly day 2, 3, 4 she sees blood. So she stops counting, waits till that blood ends, does another hefsek, and Shiva Nakim, and ends up getting to the mikvah like day 16 instead of getting to the mikvah on day 12. And this has happened month after month after month. So I suggested she see her gynecologist, and the gynecologist tells her that she has blood collecting in the scar of her C-section. And so what's going on is she can get it, that blood stays there. It's not coming out on the day of the hefsek. It's not coming out on b'dikat yom rishon, but it starts to trickle out brown on day 2, 3, 4 of Shiva Nakim. And that's creating all the problems for her. So what can she do? If she wears a panty liner and they're light brown, she can dismiss them. She should avoid doing b'dikot on those days if possible, and to be careful with wiping and urination, and to wait after she urinates. So that's her story. And that helps her tremendously. Her friend, though, had a vaginal delivery. She's 1 year postpartum. She's nursing. And for the last month and a half, she has been trying to get out of nida. She does her hefsek. She does her b'dikat yom rishon. It comes out fine. And then she sees blood. And so she stops counting, and she waits till it stops, does another hefsek, b'dikat yom rishon, again bleeds, and waits, stops counting and then starts counting again. When it ends, again, hefsek, b'dikat yom rishon is okay. I suggested she goes to the gynecologist. The gynecologist sees that she has vaginal dryness, which is probably caused by the hormonal imbalances of nursing. She prescribes some vaginal suppositories to help deal with the symptoms, and tells her that she should expect to see bleeding from this vaginal dryness. And what's happening is every time she does the b'dika, hefsek and yom rishon are okay, but after that she sees bleeding from the b'dikot that she's doing. And so as it turns out, because the doctor says that the bleeding is due to due to the vaginal atrophy, she can really keep counting while she's seeing the bleeding because there's a makkah in the area. And so all of these stories are meant to illustrate the importance of asking halachic questions, the importance of turning to halachic authorities, bringing marot, bringing underwear, bringing bedika cloths, as unpleasant as that may be, to someone to look at. It's certainly less intrusive than a gynecological exam. Often you can drop it off anonymously. And it can make a tremendous difference in your observance of nida and its effects on intimacy. And the importance of asking doctor questions, what they're seeing, if you're bleeding, how long you might expect to be bleeding. And so I encourage you to ask people that you know, ask for the Nishmat hotline, and I'm happy to answer your questions now if you have any. Anyone have questions?
First of all, thank you so much. That was so informative. I feel like I'll have more questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like I'll have more questions in the next like 3 days when it all sinks in. Something important to note that I found was very helpful in my own experience is that besides forgetting if you have reoccurring like bleeding on bedika cloths, the concept of Abdeka Tahara, I don't know how relevant, like I don't know how many both coat Tahara there are, but that is something that I don't think that a lot of people know about, that can be extremely helpful. You can probably do a better job explaining what they are than I can, but they can also help you and you.
Yes, that's. Shira, am I interrupting you, Shira?
Good, that was it.
So thank you for pointing that out. There are, a Bodeket Tara is a nurse who's trained to really look at the whole area and to see if there's a wound. And if you have a ketem or you have bleeding or you do a bdika and every time it hurts in one spot, or you just, there's a question whether there is a makkah, a bodeket tara can often help with that. Sometimes if a woman is having difficulty getting a clean hefsek tara, because while you can attribute bleeding on a bedika to a makkah, there are opinions that a hefsek tara must be completely clean. And so if you need to get a clean hefsek tara and you have a wound in the area, sometimes a bodeket can help with that as well. And so I have sent women to a bodeket, and it can make all the difference. And she will write down what she sees, write a little report, and then you hand that over to whoever sent you, whether it's a Rav or a Yoetzet.
I think particularly after childbirth, I had an experience with a bodeket tara that I couldn't get to the mikveh after one of my kids when we lived in Ra'anana, actually. And our Rav there sent me to someone who lives in Ra'anana. And it was like an interesting experience because it was kind of like going to a doctor, but it was like a halachic doctor. So it was kind of this like funny, a little bit interesting. But I remember I went on an Erev Shabbos because I was supposed to go to the mikveh on Friday night, and like she took me 2 hours before Shabbos and saved me a lot of heartache. So it was a really positive experience. And like I kept talking to our Rav, and he was like he suggested I go. There was nothing else he could do, and I like hadn't healed in a certain way. I don't remember the details or whatever. And like she found a makkah, and I was able to go to the mikveh. So that was a very positive experience in that situation.
And especially on day 7, where you've had, 6 days of good b'dikot, and then suddenly to see is, yeah. Very hard.
Good question. You mentioned before about wearing colored panty liners. Like I've actually only seen that like on Amazon when I was in America. Like, is that something that's sold here?
So I know that the Rami Levy in Gush Etzion sells it. Again, there's machloket over whether there's disagreement over whether panty liners are makabel tuma or not. And Rav Moshe Feinstein's tshuva is that it does not. But if you hold that it does receive tuma, then and you're wearing a panty liner, then a white one is a problem. So that hence the recommendation to switch to color, because anything colored does not receive impurity. I just know about the Rami Levy in Gush Etzion. I don't know about your area, and maybe you as a group can offer guidance to each other.
I just find it interesting where I could like buy Badika cloths in Supersol, and I can, that's something I would expect to often to see, like in Israel, where so many women are doing this. I would expect also just like last time I was in America, I ordered on Amazon like these black panty liners just to have, just in case. Especially when I was childbearing, I needed them more often than I do now. But I just find that surprising. Like, if not here, then where would I be able to find these?
I can't imagine you'd have to order that on Amazon in Israel. Anyone have any advice in your area?
I can't advise on disposable, but you can definitely buy non-disposable black washable panty liners. More economically friendly, environmentally friendly, And they'd be fine, I assume, because they're black.
Because they're black, yes.
Right.
But the nice thing about the white is that we didn't talk about so much about wearing white in Shiva Nakim, but if you're going to wear in Shiva Nakim, then then the preference is for a white panty liner because it's white.
But it doesn't take on anything, is what you're saying.
If you hold that it's like Rav Moshe Feinstein, also like Rav Avadia Yosef, that a panty liner does not receive ritual impurity, then the white would be fine. If you hold that it does take on ritual impurity, then it's a problem.
There's no point to it anyway. Okay.
Any other questions? Any other thoughts for next week? What would you like to talk about?
I have a question. I don't know if I had to step out for a minute to deal with the child, but I have a question about mikvah preparation itself, because I've noticed that I moved from Ramat Beit Shemesh down south here, and I noticed that a lot of the mikvah here don't have baths. And is that like a Sephardi thing, that Sephardi women don't need to take a bath? And is it possible that now I don't necessarily need to take a bath? I heard some of my friends say like, oh, I just really wash myself really well in the shower. I'm like, wait a minute, I've never heard that before. So I'd be interested in that.
Do you want to talk about that now, or you want to talk about that next week? What's the consensus here? Should we? So very briefly, the preference is to take a bath. Well, okay, let's take a step back. So according to biblical law, a woman to prepare for the mikvah needs to do iyun. She needs to look and make sure that there are no chatzitzot on her body. And then Ezra introduced the issue of shampooing and combing your hair. And then the sages introduced the idea of taking a warm bath and using soap. Bathing and using soap and hot water, and to wash the hair and the body. And the recommendation is really to take a bath. Exactly how long that needs to be depends. It depends on whether you have curly hair, difficult to comb hair. It depends on whether you're cutting your nails, but enough time to really wash thoroughly. And the recommendation for the bath comes from the notion of that if you're in the bath, then all the crevices will get soaked, the dried skin, all the dried skin will be taken care of, and scabs will get softened. However, if it's difficult to take a bath, either you don't have a bathtub or for medical reasons, then it's okay not to take a bath. Then in those circumstances, it's acceptable not to take a bath. Now, in the age of COVID, where we're telling everyone to do their mikveh preparation at home, if you don't have a bath at home, and you can't, and we're not supposed to prepare in the mikveh, it's okay to skip the bath for preparation. I don't know why there is no bath in your mikveh, but
I was just going to add, in this stage of life, for me, it's not having a bath. It's more just kids around, especially in the winter, that like it's sometimes just complicated. Would be so much easier. I much prefer if it was a clean bath at the mikveh to be able to do more prep there. In my house now, my kids have a bath and I don't. So it's like, it's just frustrating. I don't even remember here, that's the truth. It would be different than Aliza because it's a different mikveh, but I don't remember here if there's a bath or what. But I think the question would be more not even about not having, but more just about, again, just the stage of life, bathing at home.
There is a bath. There's a bath.
Yeah.
At least one, yeah. I think
Right.
so. I've not used it either. I prep here, so I don't know.
Are you preparing in the mikveh? What's the recommendation where you are in terms of COVID?
No,
I mean,
I prepare at home.
with COVID, totally not preparing at the mikveh, just quick in and out. So I guess that question is more relevant.
Well, may it be relevant,
in general.
may it be relevant in the very, very soon future.
Please goodness.
Please God.
I was also wondering if there was a difference, I don't know if you know, between an Ashkenazi woman's preparation for the mikveh versus a Sephardi woman's preparation. I built my house, and originally we didn't have any bathtubs in our house, and everyone who was involved with building, my architect and the builder, they were all Sephardim, and they were and I said, oh wait, I need a bath. Like my sister-in-law noticed on the plans that we didn't have a bath planned, and she's like, you need a bath. And I'm like, oh yeah, I do need a bath. And then my architect, who's also a religious Sephardi woman, she's like, what do you need a bath for? Like, she didn't understand why that was important to me. And I'm like, wait, maybe we just have different minhagim. I don't know.
Well, off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I will get back to you on that. But I know that there's a difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim about showering after the mikveh, because the Sephardim don't have any notion regarding showering after the mikveh, and the Ramah raises very strong concerns about a woman showering after a mikveh, after going to the mikveh, and this has come up in that you should not either. There are opinions that you shouldn't shower until you're already at home, or you shouldn't shower until the next day, or until after you've had relations with your husband. So that's an Ashkenazi Sephardi difference when it comes to post tefillah, but I'm not aware of a difference in terms of a bath.
I remember that halacha very clearly because I took the Nishmat Kala teaching course and we lived in Ra'anana, and I was sitting next to someone and she was married to a Sephardi, and like when she heard that you couldn't shower after the mikveh, she was like, that was like so ingrained as part of her, like, you know, like mikveh procedure. She was like literally in shock, but just highlighting that because it struck me.
So just for the record, I ran a webinar right at the beginning of COVID in March for Eden with Rav Shmuel Eliyahu and some people from the Ministry of Health, and we spent a great deal of time discussing the shower post mikvah in COVID, and that you may omit the shower, and this is Rav Schechter's, you may come home and shower. And Rav Schechter is given this psak also, and even on a Friday night, although in cold water, but to shower after the mikvah, that's a specific instruction now in light of COVID. So you may, under these circumstances, even an Ashkenazi woman can shower immediately after the mikvah.
I asked that exact question, actually, I guess at the beginning of COVID, I don't remember. And the recommendation I got was to like do some type of touch before, even if it's just like on the shoulder or anything. So it's not like you, like the whole reason I always learned that you couldn't shower was so that you didn't have to like wash off the mikvah water. So that it was like showing that that wasn't the reason, and like you showed you're not a nida anymore, but still were able to. I don't
Very
remember
nice.
where I got that answer from.
Very nice. Thank you. I like hearing that. Anyone else have thoughts? Are we okay with talking about birth control next time? Is that, yeah? Okay. And if you have suggestions, if you have questions, you want to ask me anything privately, I'm available. Let me put my email address, and I don't know how to put my WhatsApp on here, but I will put my email on here. And then you can write to me.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And we will see you next week.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.